You're watching NRATV with Bill Whittle.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Hot Mic Show. I'm Bill Whittle, live from Los Angeles. I was very, very lucky. Well, not lucky. I'd been waiting for it for 45 years. So I did get to see a solar eclipse, which was pretty amazing. I told Hot Mike how unbelievable it was, and he went out and tried to reproduce it with a couple of tin can lids and some tape and a pair of binoculars. They're working feverishly to try to save his vision, and perhaps we'll have him back by tomorrow. Today on our show, we're going to talk about a plan for Afghanistan. Yeah, how about that? That'd be a novel change of pace after the last 8 years, wouldn't it? You know, when we were dealing on this war on terror for the last 8 years, we had a commander-in-chief who wouldn't name the enemy. In fact, the early briefings that we had up through his presidency, briefing, books and terms and so on, they were scrubbed, and they had the word jihadi taken out. They had the words, Hudna out, Muslim out, terrorist, all those words were removed. So here's where we are, starting really with Trump now at the beginning of his presidency. Try to imagine, because this has been our treatment of the enemy on the last 8 years of the war of terror. Try to imagine that you're planning the D-Day invasion of Normandy in 1944. And try to imagine that you're going to plan this invasion, but nowhere in there are you allowed to say the words Wehrmacht. You can't say Luftwaffe, you can't say Panzer, you can't say Nazi, you can't say Rommel, or you can't mention Hitler, because if you say any one of these things, they might be considered offensive to other Germans. So try planning the D-Day invasion that way. And then imagine that while the ships are still loading in the British ports, that you give the Nazis 24 hours advance notice of where we're going to land, exactly where we're going to land, and in what kind of strength we're going to land, because that shows our commitment to our fundamental decency and our desire for peace. And then imagine sending Adolf Hitler hundreds of millions of dollars in gold bars to spend as he sees fit, and also a bunch of weapons as well. And then finally, imagine that you're Dwight Eisenhower or Franklin Roosevelt, and you get on television and say, tomorrow at dawn, we're going to launch the invasion of Europe, and it's going to happen right here on the Normandy beaches. And one way or another, if this invasion attempt fails, we will have American troops out of the country by November. That's how long we're going to be here. I'm making a commitment to have U.S. troops out by November. Now, what does that tell you? When you hear it like that, you simply think it's farcical, and I'm just, piling on points just to make a point, but I'm not. That's exactly what we've done in Afghanistan and elsewhere, dealing with this Islamic terror threat. That's Barack Obama's world. That's what he's given us. He's given us that kind of a response to this. So at the very least, Donald Trump named an enemy, and that in itself is important. And to the degree of how serious this enemy is, for those people who say, it's just random background noise, your chance of being struck by lightning is higher than being killed in a terrorist attack. Here's just some numbers for you. Here's a list of attacks. There's been 179 attacks, 1,275 killed, 932 injured, 37 suicide blasts in 25 countries. Sounds like a pretty serious year to me, but it's not a year. That's July. That's what happened in July of 2017 as a result of Islamic terrorism. So it's time for some serious action and time for a change. So we've got 4 little clips of Donald Trump's speech, brief comments afterwards, and then we'll be bringing in our guest who actually knows something about this subject. So let's roll Trump number 1 and see what he has to say.
Will not say when we are going to attack, but attack we will. We will not talk about numbers of troops or our plans for further military activities. Conditions on the ground, not arbitrary timetables, will guide our strategy from now on.
Well, that's a refreshing change of pace, isn't it? We're not going to tell them the time of our attacks, because under Barack Obama, ISIS convoys carrying the oil needed in order to get the money so they can shoot up civilians in places like San Bernardino or Paris. Many reports of American Air Force pilots in the air over the target and being told that they have to give them 45 minutes warning to the convoy of ISIS. It's true. I can't make this stuff up. I'm not that smart. So just the idea that we're going to take this seriously as if a war is a big deal. And I think that's a very important point. So let's look at the second point that Donald Trump had to make.
Terrorists who slaughter innocent people will find no glory in this life or the next. They are nothing but thugs and criminals and predators and, that's right, losers.
So here he's doing something that we also didn't see during the last 8 years, which is delegitimizing their cause, right? They want to say that this is a holy cause and they're doing it for Allah and the glory of the Islamic Caliphate and all this. But they're not. They're murderers and they're thugs. And they're clothing that murder and thuggery in their religion. And if Trump was really serious about making sure they didn't get their divine reward, he'd start smearing some bacon grease over the bullets that we launched their way. That would end this thing very quickly. Let's see the third bite.
We have been paying Pakistan billions and billions of dollars. At the same time, they are housing the very terrorists that we are fighting. But that will have to change, and that will change immediately. So
there's a little strategic thinking going on here. He blamed Pakistan, or Pakistan, as President Obama used to say on his trip that he went over there on, kind of undisclosed trip back in his youth. Pakistan's feelings are hurt by this. They've said so. My feelings are hurt by the fact that Osama bin Laden lived in Pakistan right next to their military academy for God knows how many years before we finally found out where he is. And here's a final Donald Trump bite before we bring in our guest.
The soldier understands what we as a nation too often forget, that a wound inflicted upon a single member of our community is a wound inflicted upon us all.
Now, that's very important. A wound inflicted upon a member of our community is a wound inflicted upon us all. If you take that to its logical conclusion, what it means is if you murder an American civilian anywhere in the world, the full force and fury of the United States of America is going to come down on your head. And if it did come down on their heads, we'd see a lot fewer Americans murdered around the world, a lot fewer other people too. So that's a refreshing kind of a change. So our guest today is our regular friend of ours. He's a longtime friend of freedom in the NRA, and he's actually kind of uniquely qualified to talk about the political situation in the world today because our friend Kurt Schlichter is a former trial lawyer. He has a master's degree in strategic studies. He's also a former stand-up comedian. And I think you're going to need all three of those skills, Kurt, if you're going to analyze the political situation today. But let's talk first about these two big observations I mentioned. And let's start with the first one. Donald Trump last night named the enemy.
I know, it's radical. It's nuts. It's crazy. We didn't hear that for 8 years because, of course, he didn't like who Barack Obama didn't like who the enemy was. The enemy was not the preferred enemy of the leftists. There's nothing that makes leftists more uncomfortable than having to take America's side in a fight. And Barack Obama proved it. The nice thing about the speech yesterday, and I've got a lot of thoughts on it, was that it was really taking America's side. The president looked at it not in some sort of, I know, nuts, huh? Not in some sort of gauzy, soft focus way about, transcendent principles that really aren't being articulated well, and instead looked at it in America's interests. If these guys get a chance to build up a safe haven over there, they're going to kill more Americans. So we're going to kill them first. And I kind of like that clarity, especially because I was in the infantry.
Yeah, you bet. I like it too. And since this threat is not going away, that kind of leaves us with the choice of either fight him here or fight him there. And I would rather fight him there. Kurt, one of the things that's been most frustrating to watch. Yeah, that's right. That's my point. If you're going to fight him somewhere, let's fight him over there. One of the most difficult things to watch during the last 8 years has been basically the shackling of the military. I mentioned that Air Force pilots were told to stand down on missions where they had clear targets. They were told to give 45 minutes of warning to ISIS convoys and so on. And many times in the speech, Donald Trump basically made it pretty clear that he's going to untie the hands of the military. And he's not going to be running the war from the West Wing either. You know, anybody who studied the history of Vietnam, especially under Lyndon Johnson, and heard about our naval aviators, for example, having to come in at the same time of day, at the same heading, at the same altitude, fly the same routes, exactly the same time every day, makes you just want to cry. Kurt, there were guys in Vietnam coming ashore from carriers, looking down into Haiphong Harbor and seeing the SAMs, the surface-to-air missiles, that were going to shoot them and their friends down. Seems to me, Kurt, you're either in a war or you're not, and if you are, then you better go all in. Can you hear me?
I'm having a little trouble.
Oh, okay, that's a bit. I got you now. I got you.
Look.
Did you not?
Look,
go ahead.
You know, there's all who's got a better idea how to fight a war than the guy up front. And one of the big problems here, well, I mean, we weren't seriously committed to winning means doing what's consistent with winning. That's finding the enemy and killing them.
Yeah, it's really pretty simple when you get right down to it, at least in terms of philosophy and strategery, which looks like we finally have some more of. When we come back, we're going to talk about some of the specifics, some of the details about the actual challenge in Afghanistan as opposed to other places with our friend Kurt Schlichter. I'm Bill Whittle. This is the Hot Mic Show, and we'll be back in just a few moments.